Good evening. My name is Eve Winters, and on behalf of Bookmark in the Park, I want to welcome you to our author event. Just so you know, this event is being recorded for cable TV by Park TV. And if you have any questions after for Lorna, then please step to the audience microphone, which is over here on the right, or raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone to you. Also, after she speaks, she will be in the back there to sign any books that you might have. Bookmark in the Park is a community project that encourages intergenerational reading among families in St. Louis Park. Bookmark is the brainchild of a couple of visionaries, Bob Ramsey and Mary Bloomgren, who saw community-wide reading programs in other cities and brought the concept here to St. Louis Park. Each year, we choose a theme and identify young adult, children's, and adult books that we think highlight the theme. The bookmarks that you have at your chairs are for this year. And now for our guest. Lorna Landvik knew that she wanted to write and act since she was a young child and has been successful at both. She has written 8 novels, including the recent Mayor of the Universe, which she has self-published. She started an online book club with Gail Rosenblum called Reading Goddess Radio, and she also continues to perform comedy, most recently doing her annual show in January at the Bryant Lake Bowl called Party in the Rec Room. That we won't have a party in the rec room tonight, I don't believe. And for her comedy, she probably has one of the best and most fun collections of wigs in town. Bookmark's theme this year is families. We chose Lorna's book, Oh My Stars, for an adult selection because it is a novel with a different look at family. In this book, her family of origin is not there for her. But her family that she comes to have is not a conventional one, but one that becomes all things a family should be. It is the people who become her family that support her and love her. As in all of her books, of Lorna's books, she has characters, especially women, of strength, ones you can relate to, care about, and laugh and cry with. Please help me welcome Lorna Landvik.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. It was a little snowy in South Minneapolis. Did it get here? Yeah. Where's the St. Louis Park Library? It's on Kentucky? Okay, because I think I have not been to the St. Louis Park Library, and I've been to so many libraries. In fact, I was at my neighborhood library where I have been going to since I was a child, where I wrote most of my first novel by hand, Patty Jane's House of Curl, and I had just thought, I got to run and, I'm such a greedy reader, I'll get a stack of library books and return them with about a third read, and then if I want to cheat, I'll return them overdue. And I did have an overdue book, but it was only overdue 2 days. I thought, I'll run and put it in. And I was going into the parking lot and crunch, this lady backed into me. So now my library experience is tainted. But I'm so happy I'm here to talk about Oh My Stars. And I will get into that soon, but because I do have a new book out, I just want to read a little bit from it and entice you to buy, at least a dozen copies on Amazon.com. I actually self-published it because my publisher didn't want me to write about aliens, but I had no choice. Aliens wanted to be written about. And this also has something to do with the family because poor Fletcher Weschel, this actuary in Pierre, South Dakota, is extremely lonely. His father left the family. His mother in his early 20s dies. And to lift himself up as a child, he's always had an extremely vivid fantasy life where he's an international jewel thief, a cowboy. He's just got so much in his heart and head, but nobody sees it. And I'm just going to read a little bit about the night that the aliens come to see Fletcher. And he's his neighbor is sort of his nemesis since he's been in junior high, Dodd the Bod Beckerman. So you'll know who I'm talking about when I read about Dodd. The shell Fletcher had been in since boyhood, was now a virtual sarcophagus. His days passed with little variety. It was work and sleep, with a few evening hours reserved for household and yard maintenance, television reading, and lonely amusements like solitaire and crossword puzzles. Window monitoring also became something of a pastime. Fletcher knew Mrs. Wilde across the street never cleaned up the messes her Airedale made on everyone's lawn but her own, and that every morning at 7, old man Helger did isometrics in his boxer shorts while watching the Today Show. He also knew that gut or no gut, women still saw the bod in Dodd's brawny body. There was much female commotion in and out of Shea Beckerman. Now a butcher at the Food Palace, Beckerman was in the enviable position of dealing with women every day. He was a big flirt, handing the lieutenant governor's wife her T-bones and reminding her that the rarer the steak, the better the amour, and sending Nancy Bowser, the Sunday school teacher, home with a fryer chicken, musing aloud to her why it was that breast meat was the most tender in all species. He had recently had a pork chop tattooed on his bicep and made the friendly overture of showing it to his neighbor one evening when Fletcher was doing his weekly shopping. While pricing ground beef, Fletcher heard a small tap on the window in the wall behind the meat counter and looked up to see Beckerman waving, meat cleaver in hand. Laughing, the butcher came through the swinging door, dapper in a bloodied white coat and jauntily angled paper hat. "Hey, stay away from the ground beef, Fletch. Clipped a couple of fingernails in it today." Fletcher dropped the cellophane package back into the refrigerator case, despite Beckerman's claims that he was kidding. "So have you seen this?" Beckerman asked as he let his white coat slip past the straps of his ribbed T-shirt. He tensed his bicep and the pork chop bulged. "Nice," said Fletcher. "Well, it sure beats what I got tattooed on my ass." Fletcher was saved from asking what that might be by a woman who nudged him aside with her cart, asking where the sweetbreads might be, and he scurried off, not particularly wanting to hear the butcher's answer. So it goes on a little bit more about Beckerman and Fletcher's loneliness, and I'll just skip to this part. Fletcher was savoring a cup of warm Ovaltine after his regular Monday night supper of meatloaf and creamed corn, unscrambling the daily word puzzle in the paper. It was a cold November night, a night when the wind ran howling down the avenues like a mischievous ghost, yanking leaves off trees and tossing them into roof gutters, where they would rot into muck and interfere with drainage. Suddenly the fun of unscrambling words like unrat, truant, and tiffle, fickle, was interrupted by a voice in his head urging him to do something about those pesky window drafts. It was obvious that the Farmer's Almanac extended weather forecast was wrong, and that maybe it wasn't going to be an unseasonably mild winter after all. He hadn't planned on executing his winter insulation duties until that weekend, but thinking, what the heck? He carefully cut putty strips and tamped them into the window seams. Later, as he sat on the edge of his bed, lining up the toe of his slippers with the blue stripe in the rug, he chuckled at his spontaneity. It wasn't often that he fiddled with his schedule, and it made him feel reckless and bold. He even set his alarm clock to go off 15 minutes later than usual, but eventually he calmed down and changed it back to 5:45. He began to recite chronologically the presidents and their terms of office, getting up to James Buchanan, 1857 to 1861, before he fell asleep. 3 hours later, his room was filled with aliens. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. So that's supposed to make you think, gee, what are they like? So, oh my stars. I don't have a favorite book because the old cliche is true. Your books really are like your kids, and if you profess to have a favorite, you would be a bad mother. But Oh My Stars means a lot to me for many reasons, and the biggest reason is my mother. My mother, as as all mothers should be, was my biggest fan. If you went over to her house, she had a stack of my books on the coffee table, which she would make sure you know. Oh, whose books are? Oh, they're my daughter's. And she was just an avid reader, and she had the talent of speed reading. And I can't speed read. I can't contain, meaning if I read too fast. I kind of have to plod along as I read. But she could read a book a night, and she wound up in the hospital, and I would have to go to the library to get her books to read there, and it was always, oh, I've read that. No, I already read that one. But anyway, she was thrilled when I finally published my first book, Patty Jane's House of Curl, and it had taken a long time. And I had spent my 20s in Los Angeles, California, trying to be an actress, and not just an actress, but a movie star would be fine. And I did a lot of comedy and had a lot of fun there, but the person whose career I wanted, Meryl Streep, was very selfish about sharing that. So while I was, auditioning or doing shows or performing stand-up, what I did for money was temp or waitress. And to waitress in Los Angeles is really fun because you get sent to all different places, to record companies, movie studios, television sets. It was really fun. And once my temp agent called up and she said, "We're sending you to the Playboy Mansion." And I said, "No, you're not." And I explained to her that I was a feminist and I wasn't about to go to the Playboy Mansion. And she assured me that it was strictly clerical. So I did decide I would be like Margaret Mead, exploring a secret culture. And it was the only temp job my husband ever begged to drive me to. So, my mother was always very supportive, and she had 7 sisters and 1 brother, and they would all share information about all the kids, and she'd always have to say things like, "Well, yeah, Lorna's she's working at the Playboy Mansion," and so it was thrilling for her when she no longer had to make those phone calls to her sisters to tell them what I was up to, and she could finally say she published her first book. And it was my mother who got the very first copy hot off the presses. And I ran over to her house and I explained to her, because my mother was a good Norwegian Lutheran, I said, Patty Jane, well, she's kind of got a mouth on her, because my mother never swore. But she was a big reader, so she could handle that. When I gave her Your Oasis on Flame Lake, I said, "Mom, there's a little infidelity in this. I don't know where. I have no experience. I don't, Again, she was a big reader, and the next day she called me up and said the perfect mother thing, "Well, now I don't know which book I liked better." And she was always trying to finagle information out of me as I wrote my books. But I never like to tell anyone what I'm working on. I don't tell my husband. I don't tell my kids. I just need to just have that book be in my head, funnel, its way down my arms and onto the paper. The book changes so much in my head as I'm writing. I never work from an outline. I don't know what's going to happen until I get there, and then the more I write, the more I see, and the more I go back and change things. So I don't want my confidence that I will get through writing this book to be diminished by showing somebody and having them say, "No, thanks." But I talked a lot about Oh My Stars with my mother. She had grown up in the Great Depression, as my father had, but my dad had died much earlier. And I had told her right away, I said, "Mom, the book is your swear words." That's how she swore. She would say, "Oh my stars." And you knew when you heard her say that, oh, thumbs up. And she knew that the action took place in a small North Dakota farm town, and she grew up in a North Dakota farm town. And she had, both when I was a kid, she and my dad had told me stories about the Great Depression, and it as an era had always very much fascinated me, how we had, been plunged into such depths and how we came up. And, you can see evidence of the WPA, like at Minnehaha Falls. They have the bridge, a little plaque, the stone wall surrounding it was built by the WPA. And so I had been sitting on my front porch, rocking and yelling at kids to get off my lawn. Thank you, I'm just kidding. But I was rocking on my porch, and this character named Violet Mathers came into my head, and I knew immediately that she was from the state of Kentucky, and that she grew up in the Great Depression, and that she suffers a very traumatic injury. So I thought, wow, and I kept rocking. And then the character of Shell, this Norwegian pre-Elvis came into my head. Wow, okay. And then the more I rocked, the more other ideas came to me. I got Austin into my head, and right away I knew that he was a black musician, and I thought, how is he going to fit into this book set at that time in our history? And I thought, well, yeah, I guess I'm going to figure it out. And so the book began so grimly. Is that a word, grimly? With much grimness, grimosity. And I thought, nobody's going to keep reading this book about poor Violet. So that's when I decided, I was probably about 5 or 6 chapters in. So I thought, oh man, how can I make the reader want to stick around to see what ultimately happens to her? And that's why I decided to start each chapter with her narrating as if she were sitting next to you at a truck stop, and you know how people tend to talk in diners. And I had her as an old woman, so people knew that she survived all this trauma and lived to a nice, good age. So my mother, this was the first book she didn't live to read. And after she died, it had already been written, but it wasn't published. So she knew a lot about it. But after she died, my Aunt Orpha gave me a packet of letters that my mother had sent to her youngest sister. And my mother was the family letter writer. She and I exchanged letters weekly anytime we lived apart from each other. Not in Minneapolis. We didn't know about telephones when we both were in the city. But anytime I lived out of state, we would write letters. And so it was such a gift getting this packet of letters. And in one, my mother is reminiscing about playing with her sisters closest to her in age. And whenever they played, like, school or bank or house, they always had their own particular character names. So my Aunt Amy, who grew up to marry a Lutheran minister, she was always Rose Bailey. And my very, very flashy Aunt Vellie, she was always Blanche Blanchard. And my mother was always Violet Robertson. And she had never told me that story, and I thought, oh, my Violet is, because my Violet in the book is, I hadn't set out to write about my mother at all, but she's so much like my mother in her creative side. My mother could make and sew anything. So I really feel my mother's presence in that book, and that's why it's one of my favorites. When I knew that Violet had lost her arm at the elbow, I thought, how can she continue this career that she wants, to be a fashion designer and to make things. And so one day I tied my arm up at the shoulder, and I went about all my duties, household duties, with my arm like that. And I got out my sewing machine and I saw, can I sew with this? And I could, because I could just, feed the fabric with my elbow. And, my kids come home from school. Hi, honey. And they were used to that sort of thing. But I just really honor Violet as, things had gotten so bad for her that she would go to her library to seek solace. But, she was a tall, gangly girl who had been bullied when she had two arms, but to have, this terrible trauma happen to her just invited even more loneliness. And in reading about the building of the Golden Gate Bridge, she decides, after reading about the very first suicide, I'm going to be the second. And so she gets on a bus headed towards San Francisco, and it's in North Dakota that the bus has an accident. It hits the only tree in the state. And if my mother were here, she'd be, honestly, there are far more than one tree there. Nobody happens to have a copy of the book, do they? Because I could read a little bit, but no. Okay. Well, I would love to talk from your questions. I do have the automatic tool to get people talking. I offer chocolate, and I do this because who doesn't like chocolate? And the very first reading I had was at Odegaard Books years and years ago, and I knew then from having gone to readings as an audience member that, audiences are shy. They need something. And so I baked a little tin of brownies. So I actually was serving brownies to people who were asking questions, but that got a little crummy. So I thought I got to have a little more portable chocolate. And when I went out of state, my first big tour took me to Louisville. That's how you have to say it. Louisville. And I'll never forget, a woman came up to me afterwards and she said, I'm so shy. I go to a lot of readings, but I never ask any questions because I'm just timid, but I love chocolate. And she had asked me about 7 different questions. And the last one, I'll never forget this, being, what's the capital of Texas? And I could tell her it was Austin. But so if you do have a question, I will throw it at you. I always check the ceilings, and because I don't want to do damage. And I did have an event a couple years ago in Wisconsin where I spoke at a country club with low ceilings. And I had stopped to get some kisses because I just think these are aerodynamically the best candies to throw. But this particular gas station in Wisconsin didn't have kisses, so I had to get the Rolos, and they were pretty good. So a woman had asked a question in the back, and I'm very proud of my aim, and so I hurled it at her only to see her go, oh, and I raced over there, and her husband was laughing, and she's a drama queen, and I felt so bad. Fortunately, the lens of her glass was intact, but she did have a little red mark on her forehead, and they had a hotel booked for me and everything, but I was so scared that, their version of, Mesh Besher was going to come pounding at the door that I drove all the way home that night. So I'll be very cautious when I throw and try not to break anything. And if I do, we'll just have to bring it up with the city council members at the next meeting. Deet, 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 deet. And if you're shy, I'll just keep talking. Oh, here.
What's next?
What's next? Shall I get this? All right.
He misses it on his
What's next is anytime I finish a book, the characters and usually the title. My books come to me with the appearance of usually 2, sometimes 3 of the main characters and the title, which I find so helpful because it gives me just a vague idea about what the book is about. For instance, my first book, when Patty Jane and Harriet came into my head, I thought, who are these women? And when the title Patty Jane's House of Curl accompanied them, I thought, well, whoever they are, somehow a beauty salon features into their story. So when I'm close to finishing a book, and I feel my characters are very kind to me because they know I can't handle a big onslaught. So they wait till I'm about done with the book before they come in. Hey, how would you like to write a book about us? But I lately have had sort of an onslaught, and so I actually have 2 books under my recliner in my office, and both of those have about 150 pages, and I just can't decide which one to shine attention on. And I just finished the book that's closest to me autobiographically, and it's about a young woman in Hollywood doing stand-up comedy. And she lives in a great old apartment building on Hollywood Boulevard that is now a high-rise, and that's where I lived. And, with palm trees embossed on the wallpaper and a swimming pool designed by Johnny Weissmuller, and just reeking of Hollywood history. So I am having a friend read it now, and then I'll give it to my husband, and then I'll send it out in the world. But it's really interesting. I'd never liked to write about my own life. I think that's why I write fiction. It's more fun to make it up. But even as I think I'm not writing about myself, I usually find that at least one character in every book is a candy addict, and that comes directly from me. There's usually a Norwegian in at least, well, all of my books, and that certainly comes from my heritage and just wanting to honor a group of people that don't get much honoring. So, did that answer your question? I sometimes ramble and I think, what was the question? Okay. I heard saying, oh, good.
I'm holding the mic, so I might as well ask a question. Can you? It's on. Okay. Did you tell were you the kind of like little kid who were always telling stories in their head and making up stories and things like that? And then if that's the case, then when did you decide to start putting it on paper?
I have a friend whose daughter has an imaginary friend who lives on the palm of her hand and eats nuts, and she has a whole history, and I think, man, why didn't I ever have an imaginary friend? But I loved stories, and both my parents were good storytellers. I learned how to read in first grade, like most kids, and that's what did it for me. I learned how to read with the Dick and Jane books, which, if you really think about it, they're not the most compelling. But, when you read them and those, to read those words, see Puff run, you just think, yes, I do. I can see Puff run. And I thought, I want to recreate that magic. So really it was from the age of 6 that I wanted, or 5, that I wanted to be a writer. And I always wrote. I had a very influential 6th grade teacher who very much made me believe I could be a writer. And it meant so much because he was just such a fabulous teacher. He was the kind of teacher you wish every kid could have for every grade, a real Renaissance man. And, he would take us out for very rough and tumble Winter Olympics, and then we'd come up to his room and tromp the snow off our boots, and he'd sit down at the piano and play, and we'd have a sing-along. And I think, man, whenever I visit schools, I think, where'd all the pianos go? Remember when schools had pianos and teachers who knew how to play them? And anyway, we had a radio program called Let's Write in Minneapolis, and they would read student work on the air. And Mr. Spaeth would send my poems in, and twice they read them on the air, and I was just so thrilled and so Norwegian that I had to listen to it like. And he wrote in my autograph book, "Best of luck for a fine literary career." And I thought, wow. And those words meant so much to me. And I acknowledged him in my second book. I wrote, what he had said and how much his faith in me had meant. And I couldn't remember his first name, though, so I couldn't acknowledge him with his whole name because, when you're a kid, you assume teachers don't have first names. So I just acknowledged him as Mr. Spaeth. And the Star Tribune had done a story about me covering that book, and I talked about Mr. Spaeth to them, so they looked him up for me, which really didn't require a lot of detective work. He was in Bloomington. But we had pie and coffee at the Baker Square on Old Shakopee Road, and he brought his wife, and he introduces me to his wife. And now I'm an adult, so we don't need the Ms., Mr., Mrs. So he introduces his wife as Mary, and then lo and behold, I soon learned that his name is Joseph. So I had pie and coffee with Mary and Joseph. And what always strikes me is how real life trumps fiction, because this is the absolute truth. The busboy's name tag was Jesus. Yeah. Yes, it was. So I continued to write in high school. I wrote, we had an anthology, a literary anthology that I would write for. After I graduated high school, my friend and I decided we were going to, it didn't have a name back then. They didn't call it gap years, but we decided we're going to go to Europe. And so we did. We worked in a plastic spoon and fork factory over the summer, 10 hours a day. And that was helpful in having Violet work in the thread factory. I've never actually been in a thread factory, but having worked in a factory, I knew the weird social networking that workers would have between them, and how you'd get very personal with your machines and name the machines. And in fact, I did a radio interview once about Oh My Stars, and the interviewer said, "Oh, I've got to tell you, my mother grew up in the Great Depression. She's from Kentucky, and she worked in a thread factory." And inside, I just sort of cringed, thinking, oh, what is he going to tell me? And he said, "She says you nailed it." And I thought, oh my gosh. And so we spent a year in Europe, funded mainly because we got jobs as chambermaids in Garmisch-Partenkirchen. And Germany's one of the countries that's, I think, published, if not all, most of my books. And when they'll send me a copy, and it's sort of thrilling to look through a book whose language you only recognize in bits and pieces, and usually if it has something to do with cleaning, oh, das ist schmutzig, I know what that means. So I went to the U briefly, and I took English there, but then that same friend and I moved to San Francisco to start our comedy career. Yes. And where did I go to school? My high school was Roosevelt. I went to Morris Park. Do you know those schools? Oh, did you? Here you go. It's funny how people duck sometimes. Yeah, Morris Park, they closed it for a while, but now it's open again. And my junior high was Nokomis Junior High, and they tore that down. But Roosevelt's still there. Yeah. It is. There's no hockey team anymore for Roosevelt. Or football? Oh. Are you? We are the Teddies, mighty, mighty Teddies. You know, I thought that was our own special song, and then I heard that tune is just plugged into any school. We are the Tigers, mighty. Yeah, but. Did we go to school together? Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, so you probably graduated in 1999? Okay, sorry. Yeah, Roosevelt, I liked high school. A lot of people don't like high school, but I really had fun in high school. And what makes me so mad, though, is we actually had Norwegian as a language, taught by Lars Kingdom. And he also coached the ski team, and I took French from an Armenian. So I have an Armenian French accent. Miss Karakash, do you remember her? No. Well, here's just for being a Teddy. I think that's worthy of. You're welcome. Yes. Okay. Could I review it? Oh, it's the best book ever written. No. Okay, I'm going to get this, okay? Oh, did I hit you? That's all right. I never learn, you know. Patty Jane's House of Curl is about two sisters who grew up in Minneapolis. I'd say the bulk of the action takes place in the 1950s, and that was really fun to research that time. I would go to the downtown library before they tore it down and built the new one, and you could order magazines from their stacks, and they'd come up on a dumbwaiter. And, you know, I just wanted to research the domestic life, like what songs might she have been listening to, or what were they wearing, and, you know, to see a magazine with ads for Ship and Shore blouses, 2 for $3.98. I thought, wow. So Patty Jane is married to a first-generation Norwegian who is sort of remote, and he suddenly disappears. And most of the novel goes on without us knowing what's happened to him. And she, you know, having no husband now, has to find work. So she goes to beauty school. She starts this beauty salon that ultimately becomes much more than a beauty salon. It becomes a salon. There are classes given there. Her sister Harriet plays the harp in the salon. It becomes a real place of not just community, but enlightenment and learning. And the husband does return, but in a much different way than he left. And I didn't know what had happened to him. I'm writing, and he's racing home at dawn along the river road, and slips and smashes into a tree. And I thought, Thor, what happened? And I didn't know, so I just left him there in the snowbank, figuring out, I'll get back to you. So it took me much further into the book. Oh, that's what happened to you. And then I had to do my foreshadowing and stuff. But I get told a lot, and I love when readers tell me what I write about. You know, and what my themes are, because I never know. You know, I just write the books, but I get told a lot from people that I write about community, and when I think of it, I think, oh, maybe I do. Patty Jane's House of Curl, you know, everyone congregates at the beauty salon. My next book, Your Oasis on Flame Lake, the action spot is a nightclub that this guy started in his basement. The Tall Pine Polka, it's a coffee shop called the Cup of Delight, way, way up north. And so all of my books, I think, sort of have a central place where people are just welcomed as themselves. In Mayor of the Universe, I would have to say that it's the great community of the universe that we explore. No, even there are communities in this book. All of my aliens belong to particular lodges. That's how I see space aliens. There's the lodges, the lodge that has aliens, that do the organ harvesting, and there's the lodge that does the crop art. But my lodge does, their pursuit is nothing but fun, sheer, full fun. Did that answer your question? Oh, good. Okay. Yes?
In the tall pine polka, did you have an idea what the secret ingredient in Cup of Delight was?
The question is,
I have a sense, but maybe everybody comes up with their own answer. I was wondering if you had one.
in the tall pine polka at this cafe where everyone meets, or as they say in North Dakota, cafe. Do you want to go down the cafe? There is served the most delightful, hence the name, Cup of Delight, coffee in the world. And it's a very strictly guarded secret. And if I told you, I'd have to kill you. No, but the question is, do I know the secret? I might not. What's your ingredient?
It's cardamom.
Cardamom. You're Swedish, I bet. Oh, Finnish. Okay. Cardamom, that's very interesting. I will try.
A little crunched up seed in it.
I will. In coffee or tea? I would think it would be better in tea.
I've only tried it in coffee, but I'll try tea too.
Okay, everyone tonight, go to Trader Joe's and get a cardamom pod, and then brew a pot of tea and get back to me. Okay. I will try that though. But no, cardamom is not. No. Leo Leary her background was Irish, so she probably didn't know about cardamom. Maybe corned beef. I don't know. Yes?
I know that you have a family and that you speak many languages in a year. How do you discipline yourself to do your writing, and how much time do you spend a day?
Well, my girls are grown now, so the only one I really have to worry about is our dog, who insists on exercise. But I take him down to the river just about every day. And I consider my river walks very much conducive to writing because I'm just really thinking down there. I don't have a writing schedule. I always think, what would that be like? But I just can't focus enough to say, yes, from 9 to 11 I'm going to write. I do write every day. It's pretty rare that I miss a day. And on those days that I do miss, I really consider my thinking about it as solid work done. But today, for instance, I wrote in the afternoon. I don't often write in the morning, and I know a lot of writers do, and they like to be fresh and face the paper, but I like to write a lot of times late at night, and during hockey season, my husband's very happy to be occupied watching the Wild or the Gophers, and so I will write a lot at night, just regular night hours, like 8 to 10, but often if I start writing at 8 at night, I could still be writing it by, at midnight. But I can't say, I've heard also some writers who do put in a full 8-hour day, and I don't know what that would be like. I figure if I'm going to be my own boss, I'm going to have some pretty sweet hours, Because I'd probably be the kind of boss I wouldn't even pay myself overtime, so why sweat it? Any more questions? Yes? I do. I wouldn't call it stand-up comedy. I did a lot of that in Los Angeles, where you're doing your 5 or 10 or 15 minutes. But I much prefer acting, and if I can do comic acting, via improvisation or being in comic plays, I really enjoy that. So, yeah, every year, sometimes twice a year, I do a show at the fabulous Bryant Lake Bowl in Minneapolis. And it's usually weekends for a month, and it's made up that every night based on audience suggestion. And I have as you said, a bunch of wigs and props, and I go backstage after I hear suggestions and then come out and give a monologue based on those suggestions. And it's really fun, and I don't have to memorize lines. At the Bryant Lake Bowl? Yeah. I think the Bryant Lake Bowl may be the only bar, restaurant, bowling alley, theater in the country. It's pretty unique. And it's got really good food, too, not typical bowling alley food. It's really something. Yeah. Well, I neglected to tell you we're here till midnight, so come on. I hope you brought your jammies. Yes, you in the back, sir.
How many editors have you had, and did any of them ever say, jeepers, you should move over to the Big Apple where the literati are?
Well, my editors have been in the Big Apple. They've been, through my publisher. And a lot of people do ask me, what's the difference between an agent and an editor, and how does that work? And your agent is the one who sells the work. Your editor is the one who buys the work and then, reads the manuscript and, chapter 3, I think, can you speed it up a little? Or, I didn't like that guy in chapter 8. What can you do about it? And so you will either take what your editor tells you and see the merit in that and change what she suggests, or you think, no, this is how I really want it. And then my editors have been very agreeable. Okay, well, that's fine. That was just my suggestion. So I've had a couple of, my first editor for Patty Jane's House of Curl was actually a freelance writer hired by this very small press that initially published Patty Jane. And she was very surprising. She, had very good credentials, but on the phone would ask me questions like, and what is a Norwegian? And the person who's from Norway, and she really had that very provincial New York attitude that anything, west of the East River or Hudson, was Amish. And so then I would play around with her a little bit, because she would ask me questions like, can you really get a taxi cab in Minneapolis on New Year's Eve? And yeah, we have a fleet here. And so then I thought, well, if she thinks, I'm out in the boondocks, I'll let her think that. And I remember once the phone was ringing and I raced upstairs to answer it, and it was this particular editor. I said, oh, I'm so sorry, I was just out in the back 40. There's just this deadly pause. But she did what none of my editors since has done, and she really line edited me. And that's where you go in with your red pencil and you cross out words and sentences and rewrite the sentence. And it shocked me. I complained to my agent. I said, she's wrecking my book. She's taking all the parts that I think are funny out. And my agent's advice to me, and this was before you would do corrections and everything, online, or everything was typewritten out with the blue pencil, and so my agent's advice was just retype the pages that she wants edited, but retype them the way you want them, and we'll resubmit and see if she notices, and we did, and she didn't. So, I've only had about 3 editors since. They tend to last until they go to another publisher. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
How about, should you move to New York?
Should I?
It never came up.
No, you can be a writer anywhere. I'd love to have, like, a little pied-à-terre on Central Park West, but I don't even have a cabin on Lake Osakis. I gotta start small and big. But I love New York City. I think it'd be really fun to live there, but unless I'm on The Apprentice or something, I don't see it happening. Paris, maybe. I'll get that Paris apartment and use my Armenian French and see how that goes. Do any of you read books on tape? Listen to books on tape? Read books on tape. That's something that I started to do once I, was on local tours or like driving up north or into the Dakotas or something. And I will just end with this wonderful experience I had listening to the book on tape called Ireland. And it was written by an Irish writer named Frank Delaney. And the book itself is about an itinerant Irish storyteller who goes county to county telling his Irish stories. So it was just great to not only have the writer read the book, but the book's about a storyteller telling you stories. And I was driving down to Mankato, Minnesota, to speak at the Betsy Tacy Society. And do any of you know Betsy Tacy? And yeah, loved those books as a kid. And they have a very devoted following. And Maud Hart Lovelace wrote from Mankato, and her books are set in Deep Valley, which is really Mankato. So anyway, I'm driving down, and the sun is setting over the cornfields, and in the book on tape I'm listening to, the Irish storyteller is talking about meeting the poet W.B. Yeats for the first time. And he's saying, oh, what a guy W.B. Yeats was. He said, you don't have to be Irish to believe in the magic of the green people. The green people, the magic of the leprechauns, well, they're there for anyone who just keeps their ears and eyes open. And just as he said that, I look up to see the Jolly Green Giant and Sprout, and I just about drove into the ditch, and I yearn for that dramatic an experience again while listening to a book on tape, but as yet I have not had it. So with that, I will end. I thank you so much for reading Oh My Stars. Violet thanks you. If any of you want to follow me, I have come on, follow me. But follow me online. I have a Lorna Landvik author Facebook page where I tend to post. I don't have a personal Facebook page because that's just too personal. But I do write little essays on my Facebook page, so I hope you'll check it out. And thank you so much. And for those of you who didn't get any candy, I'll have some up there for you. So thank you.